First revealed back in March of this year, Pax Dei garnered quite a bit of positive attention pretty much right out the gate, being a visually appealing, brand new open world, low fantasy MMO. I know, at least speaking personally, I was pretty darn excited from what I saw. The game is being developed by Mainframe Industries, sporting the often touted studio full of veterans, in this particular case with members who worked at Blizzard, CCP, Remedy, and Ubisoft. Their stated goal with Pax Dei to reimagine and create a truly next-generation MMORPG. This is going to be an open-world, player-driven survival sandbox. It's got the core survival loop of gathering materials, crafting items, and building bases. We will start in this region called the Heartlands in relative safety, leaving us free to build, craft, and learn the basics of combat, after which we get to venture out into the woodlands and surrounding areas where things get progressively more dangerous, with stronger PvE enemies and the threat of other players in open PvP, because PvP is going to play a fairly large role in this game. Now, this is a gameplay loop overall and kind of a structure for a game that I really like. Having these safe havens, then being surrounded by danger, pushing out as far as you can for discovery, rewards, to collect loot and resources before retreating back to safety. Like, I love this structure, this gameplay loop. I find it all very rewarding and incredibly immersive. Added extra layer of some PvP in there as well. As long as it's not full-on grief mode, that can be a lot of fun, and I really wish more games were structured similar to this. Minus the PvP side of thing, Valheim was kind of like this as well. You started off in the first biome, you're relatively safe, and then you venture out into the wilderness, going to the more dangerous areas before retreating and going back home. I really like that structure for a game. Now, beyond that, Pax Dei is going to have the standard suite of expected MMO and survival game features. There are crafting and progression systems, base building with tons of customization, PvE encounters, including things like dungeons. It's got third-person action combat, and as I mentioned, a fairly strong emphasis on an engaging player environment and player versus player combat and player economy, all of that. So that is kind of the basic general overview of the game. We did learn a decent bit of additional information around the reveal, but I kind of covered all of that in pretty good detail in the last video, so if you want to learn more, just go check that out. Today, I actually want to talk about the new stuff. There's been tons of updates over the last few months, new gameplay, features discussion, interviews, and the announcement of a playable build coming sometime later this year. And I know over the last few years, we've been hearing that a lot for different MMOs, but it's true this time. They promise. And I promise we'll dive into everything after a word from today's sponsor, Call of Dragons. This is a new fantasy conquest game developed by the creators of Rise of Kingdoms. It features classic 4X gameplay, letting you zoom in and out on a huge, seamless world as you command armies to conquer the battlefield. You'll train up these behemoths and heroes, each with their own unique skills, pairing ones with complementary abilities together. You can even put them alongside other players' forces for synergized boost with all sorts of potential configurations. These behemoths are indispensable secret weapons in the game's large-scale warfare. Choosing the right behemoth to summon onto the battlefield can really help you overcome the enemy forces. Some other features of Call of Dragons include 3D terrain that shapes the gameplay, forcing you to adjust to the environment, balancing melee, ranged, and air units. There's a variety of content types. You'll fight other players in PvP, combat otherworldly invaders either alone in PvE or together with your fellow Alliance members in guild versus environment battles, or fight other guilds in guild versus guild warfare. So if you want to learn more about Call of Dragons or try the game out for yourself, go ahead and check out my link in the video description below. All right, so let's talk about the new updates for Pax Dei. They recently updated and expanded upon the game's official FAQ, addressing tons of questions received from Discord and other sources. The new FAQ is massive, some roughly 32 pages in total is what I counted. It's a lot to digest, but I've gone through and picked out some of what I think is the most interesting and important bits of information. Now, a couple of points that I want to cover from last time, as these are major aspects of the game that bear repeating. This is a real honest-to-goodness survival sandbox game that is player-driven to the point that there are no traditional MMO NPCs. You will not find big cities or even small towns that have vendors and quest givers inside of them, because everything is player-driven, player-inhabited sandbox game. Players fill the lands, they build the towns, they handle all of the trading and the crafting of items, the warfare. Everything is surrounded around the players. That said, there are still NPCs in the form of enemy AI, creatures to fight, and mythological and otherwise. The game is going to have a lot of PvE content surrounding the PvP, PvP, but yes, no quest givers, no vendors, etc. There's also no traditional class system. You will not be picking from like a warrior or mage or an archer, but there will be roles and the existence of the Holy Trinity, being tank, healers, and damage dealers. They haven't specified here, but this likely means the roles are going to be fulfilled by the weapons you use, your gear, and whatever skills you happen to select. There's no traditional MMO questing system. As mentioned, there's no NPC quest givers, but you're not just going to be getting quest in general. Instead, you will just kind of discover things, like maybe you'll come across an old tome or a scroll that leads you to an objective, but it's not your basic bog standard MMO quest where this thing just kind of pops up in the corner of your UI. And exploration in general is going to play a pretty massive role, especially once you're leaving the safety of the Heartlands and you're venturing out into those more dangerous areas. And again, PvP plays an integral part in the game as well as the game's economy. It takes place exclusively outside of the safety of the Heartlands, but players do have some sort of freedom here in terms of how they engage in PvP, and even more so, they specified how much you're willing to risk in exchange for reward. We don't know how exactly they're going to manage this system, but clearly it sounds like you're willing to up the odds for a chance to get better rewards, maybe increase your magic find or the XP gain or currency gain that you get while out in those areas. But if you do so, you're going to potentially lose more. We know there's going to be stakes dying in PvP. They just have not specified at all what that means. As for the new stuff, well, for starters, they spoke at pretty massive length about the game's world, how it is structured, what there is to do and see, and just what to expect. So they say that the world of Pax Dei is split up into 4 main regions. These are Gallia, Gothia, Iberia, and Anatolia. For release, they are focusing on building out specifically the Gallia region, whose terrain and atmosphere are all inspired by southwestern France, with a mix of Nordic elements and a pinch of magic thrown in as well. That particular region, Gallia, from what I understand, is basically a bulk of all of the gameplay footage that we've seen released for the game thus far. So each one of those 4 regions is further broken up into several different zones in what they are specifically calling provinces. Now, there are a few main type of provinces, like there are Heartland provinces, which is those areas that you can build and gather in relative safety. There's no PvP in the Heartlands, but then there's also like contested provinces, and those are going to be areas where you'll encounter more dangerous PvE, and as implied by contested, that is where PvP is going to take place. So inside of the Heartland provinces, there's also specific further regions called home valleys, and these are basically the areas where you can build. Players will put down their own plots of land, and then on their plot you can build your home. You can work with other players to build villages and even cities. They provided an example map of one of the Heartland regions from a recent Friends and Family alpha test, and these darker red zones that you see, those are the home valley areas. So those are the spots in which players could place down a plot and start building up their own particular homes, villages, whatever. And then the boundaries beyond this Heartland province, all of the area that isn't highlighted in this pinkish hue, the green and the white of those mountains at the top, those areas could either connect to other Heartland regions or into contested regions or some of the other potential provinces. In terms of size, they've said that at release, their plan is to launch with at least 2 or 3 Heartland provinces, plus some dungeon provinces, contested provinces, and other areas that they're not talking about as of yet, and that overall this is going to give us an approximate play space of 150 square kilometers or 58 square miles. This is crazy. For reference, that is roughly twice the size of the play space in Red Dead Redemption 2, 2.5 times the size of Breath of the Wild, and 4 times the size the map of Skyrim. And that's only one region, this Gallia region. They're intending to have 4 total when the game is officially done. Maybe it's a bit too much, I don't know, but this is also a procedural sandbox game. It's also a game where the players are going to be determining everything. And speaking of the game size, they did touch briefly on how they're building something this big. Surprise, surprise, procedural. They say that our world generation process is semi-procedural, or what we like to say, procedurally assisted. We believe that a human should make the interesting decisions while the computer should do what it excels at, which is filling in the details. I've talked about this in prior multiplayer videos. This is pretty common practice in development for open world games nowadays. People aren't kind of doing all the blades of grass and all of the leaves on the trees and manually doing the bark of every single tree. A lot of that stuff is put together procedurally while the actual humans are putting out the points of interest, the more interesting stuff, and then using these procedural elements to fill things in. I will say, the fact that one of this game's eventual 4 regions is 4 times the size of the Skyrim map, if that's too big, if that's like explorable space bloat, I don't know. It depends on a lot of things. It depends on the fast travel system. It depends on movement speed. It depends on what there is to do within that space. And are we spending 10 minutes walking, or is there always something interesting around every corner? Do we need to explore the entire map? My guess is probably no. If anything, I guess bigger is better when it comes to sandbox survival. I don't want a small sandbox. I want a big sandbox, especially depending on how they're handling servers and phasing. Like, is everyone playing on one? If the game is really this big, are we all playing on one server? That probably doesn't sound reasonable, unless they have a way to dynamically spread out people so that we're not all spawning in the same starting zone. I don't know. There's still a lot of questions, but suffice it to say, it's going to be a big game. Like, lots of space. 4 times the size of Skyrim in the first zone. And they've opted to give players a lot of detail pretty much immediately, saying that as soon as you log into the game, you can see the whole map of the province that you're in. There's no fog of war, and it gives you information about the topography, the biomes, some of the points of interest. What it won't give you is the resources in each area, things like mountain passes, dungeon entrances, villages that players have constructed. Some areas, especially the dungeons, will have no maps at all, leaving players to explore the lay of the land and create their very own maps. I really like the sound of that last bit where there are locations like dungeons where they're not going to give you a map whatsoever. It's all about you actually being engaged. I think that really helps a lot with the immersion, and the idea of player-made maps is really cool as well. What is interesting, though, is I can't think of a game I've played in recent memory that just shows you the map that you're in, like, immediately. Although it is worth reiterating, they did say this was specifically for the one province that you're in, and realize every zone consists of many, many provinces. So you're going to spawn in one of 3 to 4 Heartland provinces in that first zone that the game's launching with. And you're just going to see the province. You're not going to see the contested areas around. You're not going to see the dungeon areas around. There's going to, and any additional provinces, as they're calling them, you won't see that. You'll just see the first Heartland area that you're in. So I guess that's really not so bad. It does seem like they're revealing a lot, but you know what? With a game as big as what they're talking about, that's probably for the best, really. They did discuss fast travel as well, saying that the game will have some, but it will be limited. Specifically, they said, while we do not want to make life particularly hard for people running simple, mundane errands and projects, logistics and transport of materials will play a part in the economy. To give some examples, there will be some teleportation system to facilitate things like dungeon exploration, but you won't be able to teleport 2 tons of gold ore simply. That sounds about right. A lot of games do this. Valheim did this, where they limit transport of materials and resources, forcing you to ferry things by a cart or by boat, while allowing more freedom for players who aren't carrying much of anything to move around, especially in a world as big as they're discussing with Pax Dei. I think this is a good way to do it. If you want to harvest tons of gold ore or iron or whatever, you're going to need to transport that manually. But if you just want to go from your Heartland area and teleport to the entrance of a dungeon, apparently there's going to be some options there. Again, no specifications. If you can teleport anywhere, if you can teleport to other players, if you can set up way gates to teleport, if they're going to be pre-established waypoints. We don't know any of this, but there will be some fast travel, just not if you have a ton of valuable stuff, basically. They said one goal for them is to never have any obsolete areas or resources. They said in our game, we strive to make every resource valuable and useful throughout your entire journey. Even the simplest resources have their place, whether it's building walls for your village or equipping warriors with weapons and armor, the demand remains consistent. At the beginning of your adventure, you may find yourself gathering these resources on your own. However, as you explore and progress in the world, you'll have the opportunity to rely on other players who are newer to the game or experts in their respective trades to fulfill your resources. Obviously, first thing that comes to mind when they talk about this, I hope they're not making you rely too heavily on new players, because that requires a constant influx of new players. And if they're not there to harvest those basic resources for higher level players to buy off of them or trade with them or whatever systems they have in place, that just means all the people are going to have to go do themselves. I like how other games have done it, where as you progress, you can either automatically or with ease get a high yield of those early resources, have some way as you progress, as we've played tens or hundreds of hours of the game, have ways for us to get those real basic resources really easily, so we're not going back to those small areas and spending hours harvesting the basic wood and the basic iron ore or whatever it is. A few other bullet points from the world section of the FAQ. They've talked about having a variety of biomes, pretty much what you expect. There will be forest, mountains, lowland areas, and swamps. These will be blending naturally from one to the other. The world is going to be inhabited by all of the typical creatures you expect, real ones, along with fantasy creatures based off of myths and folklore from the Middle Ages. The expected resources will be present as well. There will be various types of plants, herbs, ores, and wood, all of which will respawn unless players construct buildings that prevent the resource spawning from happening. The game is going to have dynamic weather effects with rain, shine, and fog. There will be a day-night cycle. This is also going to impact things like mob spawning, resource availability, and more. We got a bit of information about building as well. Base building is going to play a pretty pivotal role in this game. So for one, they uploaded 2 brief videos that showcase the building in action, and I gotta say, for the alpha build, for how early in development this game does appear to be, this looks really good. Like, fairly detailed. It seems highly customizable. I really like what I see here. Not only the visual presentation of the buildings, but even how they snap together, how they crumble apart when you take it down. Really like the basics that they have for building already. They have stated, and not surprisingly, that you can't build anywhere because, as mentioned, you can only build in Heartland Valleys and you can only build on whatever particular plot that you claim. So the building is going to be restricted as well for any areas that would impact gameplay or negatively impact other players. You will be able to visit other players' settlements, going there for things like trading and political reasons, to team up and do guild stuff, who knows. The only limit, they said, on building is going to be the amount of land available on your individual plot. They have also said that the building system is going to feature a physics system that forces structural integrity. There is a height cap, but they said most people aren't going to get anywhere close to it because of the required structural framework to get anywhere near the ceiling of the height cap for building. So have to be structurally sound. I actually really liked that in Valheim. I felt that putting that puzzle together made building of my bases a lot more interesting than just being able to, put up a little twig and then build a mansion on top of it. I actually enjoyed the puzzle solving nature of that. So it's cool that they have that system here. And there's going to be decorative items, things like furniture, rugs, chairs, tables, etc. They haven't said if there's going to be any things like buffs associated with that. I would assume maybe that's something that comes down the road. And one interesting thing that I found here is in the housing section, they actually went into some detail about how it interacts with PvP. Namely, initially it's not going to, but that's something they want to consider in the future. So they said, you cannot build outside of Heartlands in the current version of the game. We want to have this eventually, but PvP building destruction that works in an MMO is highly challenging to have work in a way that creates a good gameplay experience, so we haven't made this yet. We're working towards having a solid core game at launch, and we planned PvP building for a game update. Having said that, we absolutely want to have high stakes PvP in the game when it launches. It's just that the stakes are not related to building. The reason not to have the houses you're building in Heartlands be part of PvP is that we want the base game to be enjoyable even for those who don't want to participate in PvP directly. So basically, it sounds like base raiding and destroying of bases isn't going to be a thing initially. It's something that they're considering for an update later down the road. I think it's also an important takeaway from that is that while they are emphasizing the PvP nature of this game, they are trying to also say PvP, if that's something you don't want to do, it's something that you can avoid. They're doing that initially with the housing system, but then also, as mentioned earlier, they're having some sort of stakes slider or toggle option, or however they present it, that lets you decide how you want to engage in PvP, how much you're willing to risk and lose, again, for a potential reward. A couple other notes here from the FAQ, briefly touched on monetization. The TLDR is they don't have anything to announce yet, but because Pax Dei is a player-driven economy sandbox game, they want to make sure they have a business model that doesn't negatively impact this. My assumption then is that this isn't probably going to be free to play. It's probably going to be a base price game, and ideally they avoid any pay for convenience, pay to win features, because yes, that would directly impact a sandbox player-driven economy game. They did go out of the way though to mention that there will be no blockchain or NFTs in this game. Good on you guys. In terms of platform, PC first and foremost, although they are also in tandem making this game available on cloud gaming platforms. platforms. There were other updates as well besides what was in this FAQ. For example, that PC gaming show that took place the other month, they had a little short video there, really just kind of high level stuff talking about like them as a development team and their inspiration for the game, and really basic general stuff about PAX Day. But it was still interesting nevertheless. I like where they decided to shoot this, where they got their B-roll. It looks pretty, I don't know. And then there was some new videos as well. They put up a couple of new videos on the official channel. One just taking a look at the development studio, talking about their philosophy and what they hope to do with this game. Again, very high level stuff. They showed off some in-game footage. We got some of the building footage. There was also a bunch of unlisted video clips in that FAQ, most of which the footage you will have seen in this video up until this point. They also released a couple of pages worth of screenshots from the alpha builds, showcasing various areas, parts of the different biomes and stuff like that, and also some of the buildings created by people in the alpha test. Pretty cool stuff. Also, recently on the Discord page, they have this short clip of this demon boss with these like bat wings and bats flying out of it. This is actually way more fantasy than I expected from this game, especially since they called it low fantasy. This is a massive, scary looking, not authentic real world boss, and I'm actually all for it. I thought that looked really good. So what's next? Well, at the moment, PAX Day still has no release date. In fact, it doesn't even have a release year, which leads me to believe, unless they announce otherwise, probably not expecting this to come out in 2024. That said, hands-on testing is evidently right around the corner. They have said that the dev team is hard at work prepping the game and its infrastructure to be as clean as possible when we open the gates. We can't wait to let more people in during our first public test planned for later this year. There you go. It is coming. It will be happening this year. That is the promise. They've also made mention of simultaneously, I believe, when that other testing takes place, they're going to be lifting the NDA, which means we can expect to see more footage and stuff, which is good. So some initial thoughts here. I really like what they've shown. I think it looks really good and interesting. And no, I'm not just talking about like the Unreal Engine 5 visuals. Sure, that is pretty as well. But the structure of the game and the world, the building mechanics that they've shown, and some of the early systems that they've shown and discussed, it all sounds great. Primary early concern, the total lack of gameplay on display. Now, I have read that the developers specifically stated the current iteration of combat is just a placeholder. They don't even really have combat nailed down. They're saving the final version of combat and really diving in on that for later on in development. In my opinion, combat should be one of the main focuses. Don't save it for too late, because if the game doesn't feel good to play, even though building's a part of this game, right? It's probably a big part of this game. They have PvE. There's a big focus on PvP. For both of those things, combat should be a #1 priority. I don't know anything about game development, of course, right? That's the baseline of this statement here. But nevertheless, combat, but it needs to be good. It absolutely needs to be good. So I hope, and I'm looking forward to seeing their later implementation of combat, and I hope it delivers, because it needs to be good for me and a lot of people, honestly, to want to play the game. But that said, and with the caveat of we are likely a couple of years away from release, alpha testing will be happening later this year, and we will be getting a lifting of NDA, so I can't wait to see more and maybe potentially play it. Either way, looks cool. I like what they have shown thus far. I hope they do a good job of combat when that final version comes through, and can't wait to see just another game to add to the pile of games coming out for us to look forward to. I say that almost like begrudgingly. It's like, dude, we find out about these games so early. Part of me loves it because it's stuff to look forward to, but part of me is like, what century am I going to play this again? But yeah, PAX Day looks cool. Looking forward to more. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the vid. I'll see you next time. Take it easy.